companies expand to the cloud, asset visibility worsens. The Jupyter One Cyber Asset Management Platform helps you get it back. Jupyter One provides context, understanding, and visibility into your entire cyber asset attack surface. With over 150 integrations, including AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, and more, Jupyter One helps you answer complex security and infrastructure questions, understand the contextual relationships between assets, and build the foundation for your security program. Try it for yourself. Get started with your free Jupyter One account today.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish. And today we're talking about cloud security fundamentals in the Azure space. A couple of weeks ago, we had level 1, and this time we're going on leveling up a bit as well. We're going level 200. And for this, I've got a really good friend of mine, and as we do in style as well. So I'm going to play a quick music to bring her on. 1 second. Hey, welcome, Tanya.
Hi. Very nice to see you, my friend. Thank you.
It's good to see you as well. I was going to say, you maybe should refer to why we picked that song as well, so people know your other talents as well.
Yeah, so I wrote that song years ago. So I speak French, je parle français, pas juste anglais. So I speak both official languages for Canada. And so when I was trying to learn French in my early 30s, I wrote a song to help me remember. This might sound weird, but there's this different tenses in French, and le subjonctif was very difficult for me. So I wrote it into a song, and now I can never forget it.
Right. Well, I am glad you wrote that. So now we would never forget it as well, I guess.
It was also a song about heartbreak, which is a thing that I'm really good at writing those songs.
Fair enough. I would definitely encourage people to listen to that as well. What a few people coming online as well. Hey, Vineet, just came online. Hey, man. Hi, thanks for coming in. So I doubt people would not know you, but for the 1 or 2 people listening to this live stream right now who do not know who Tanya is, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your professional background.
Awesome. So I'm Tanya Janca. I'm also known as She Hacks Purple. And I am a person obsessed with the security of software. And I realize this is the Cloud Security Podcast, but guess what is hosted a lot in the cloud? Tons and tons and millions, if not hundreds of millions of pieces of software. And so the security of the software is very important to me. I wrote a book about it, Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. I speak at conferences. I teach courses. And I am the founder of We Hack Purple, which is a community and academy all about AppSec, secure coding, etc. And we were just bought by Bright Security last month. And so big thank you to Bright, because now all the courses in the We Hack Purple Academy are free. So if you go to the community, basically you join, and we have put all the courses in there now, and they're free. So they used to cost a lot of money in the academy, but now you can get them for free. And guess what? We have one on Azure Security. Azure Security.
No, don't say.
And so, yeah. So when Ashish was like, "Hey, do you want to come on my podcast?" I was like, "You had me at hello."
I did not even think of Azure Security courses, and I thought of Tanya. Did not think of that as well. We've got a few people coming in as well. Hey, Mukhtar, thanks for coming in. So for people who maybe, I guess, now since the 1 or 2 people have been introduced to Tanya as well, and now they know about the awesome courses that We Hack Purple is doing, what are some of maybe a good place to start? Because when we were talking about the security fundamentals last time, we touched on a few of the important components, but I guess we didn't really go into the high level of, we spoke about tenants, we spoke about subscriptions, we didn't go into the scaling part, we spoke about certification and everything else. So in this episode, I'm hoping we can talk more about, say, the next level up from that. What are some of the common Azure security services that people should be aware of?
Okay. So one of the things so I used to work at Microsoft, and I worked on Azure security stuff with the developer advocates. And one of the things that was really exciting for me joining Microsoft is that there are people there who are just as obsessed about security as I was. And so they're literally trying to make one of every type of security tool, like from my opinion and my viewpoint, not like what they're saying, but what I am seeing. And so so some common things. So first of all, there's Security Center. And I know that we're going to talk about Security Center a lot in a bit, but do you want me to like kind of describe it now, or do you want to like make
That's
them
fine.
hold them in
'Cause I think
suspense?
just to,
Or okay,
let's set the stage for it, I guess. That way we can just
okay,
talk about it as well.
okay. So Security Center is kind of an overview of like a dashboard of all your security in your entire Azure subscription. And so you could have it be like a top level subscription with like everything down and show you everything. And what I mean by that is it'll show you, for instance, it gives you a grade. So there's a score that you get. But basically, it tries to show you at a glance how you're doing. And then you can drill down into different parts, and it actually makes you a to-do list. So they call it recommendations. And basically they put all their super smart people together, and we're like, what could go wrong? What are best practices? Let's make a list. And everywhere where it's not applying, we'll just put it on their to-do list. So number one is always turn on multi-factor authentication for all your owner account. Like if the account can buy stuff, I'm sorry, a password's not enough. And so basically like that's always and I was like, yes, I want everyone using MFA. And so that's what Security Center does. It's a beautiful dashboard that shows you all the things. And so then the next thing that people talk about a lot is Azure Defender. And so when I worked at Microsoft, Azure Defender and Microsoft Security Center were one thing. Then Defender got yanked out. Then it got put back together and the whole thing was called Defender. Then it got separated and now there's Security Center and Defender. And basically Azure Defender is the paid part of Security Center. So Security Center is free with your subscription. By free, I mean it's part of the cost that you're paying. And then Defender is on top of that. You pay more for even more stuff. And so I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, so it's a CSPM, a Cloud Security Posture Management tool. And so it looks across all your stuff and says like, listen, we've did VA scans on this. We checked your firewall stats. We checked all these things. Here's a picture and here's what's wrong. Yeah. And I think it was the first one because like I was trying to describe to people what it was. I'm like, it's magical. It like gives you this whole view of everything and it tells you how to fix stuff. Like it's not cheap, costs a lot, but it's a thing that didn't exist. And so then slowly other products started getting rolled out and they call it CSPM, which means Cloud Security Posture Management. And so the posture, the idea is it's an overall arcing view of everything in your cloud system and stuff that you need to do to fix it. And so what Defender is it has just extra cool features. So there's PIM. So, or just a second, let me just go through them one by time. So there's just-in-time access. So closing all your ports when you're not using them. There is application control tooling, which is used to be called application waitlisting, but that's not like super politically correct. So they changed it. Yeah. And then, but a lot of people are like, oh, you mean waitlisting. And I'm like, that's what it used to be called. But what we're really doing is like making an approved list. Yeah. And then file integrity monitoring. So that's FIM, file integrity monitoring. And there's like just like threat protection specifically for databases or threat protection specifically for, I think they have not infrastructure as a service, IoT. And so the idea is basically like you can buy extra security services and that is Azure Defender. Like you get it as like one big package with Azure Defender.
Interesting. Wow. So there's a lot more stuff in Defender than what it used to be. And I can understand why making it paid as well. And maybe actually, now that I think about it, I just had a question from Mukhtar here. And I feel it's probably good to just level the playing field because there might people still be like, hey, great, but what's the Azure security thing? So I'm assuming, and Mukhtar, feel free to correct me if my question is correct. So there you go. Is Sentinel part of SCPM?
Okay, so
what is SCPM?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. CSPM.
Yeah.
So Cloud Security Posture Management.
Maybe that's what he's after. Okay. Yes.
So Sentinel is a separate product and it's a SIEM. So it's a SIEM, Security Information and Event Management System. So it's like, I'm probably not supposed to say this, but it's exactly like Splunk, except for it's just made for Azure. And unlike Splunk, it's like part of it, if that makes sense. Like it's, how do I word this? So Sentinel's already built into Azure because it's made by Microsoft. So you just like pay and turn it on. Well, with Splunk, because it's a third party, you have to like roll it out and set it up. But Splunk works on any network, and Sentinel, as far as I know, only works in Azure. And so basically what a SIM does is it tells you what's going on in your network. It's like, hey, this happened and we think that's weird. You should probably take a look. This is happening and we are pretty certain it's this type of attack and you definitely need to do stuff. And basically a lot of large organizations have something called a SOC, a Security Operations Center. And it's a whole bunch of people who are really good at network security. And they sit there and they watch the SIM, and as various alerts come up, they go and they track them down and see if it's something real or not. And depending upon how big your organization is, you may or may not have that situation. Like a lot of places don't have a SIM, and that is okay. But, you know, for instance, when I worked in the Canadian government, they had a gigantic SOC with like 50 experts in this giant room, and they all got like 1 million monitors. And I'm like, why do you get 6 monitors and I only get 1? They're like, because you're just a little pen tester. Go away. That's my friend, not the boss. But yeah, so Mukhtar, hopefully that answers your question. But basically, Sentinel is a separate product, and it is outside. It does not come with the Azure Defender bundle, as far as I know. And from what I'm told, it costs approximately the same as Splunk.
So
and I don't think that's
probably have a lot of market. So there was another question from Mukhtar earlier, and hope you got this right. So, and this is basically leveling up the playing field for anyone else who's listening in as well, from maybe more from a career perspective as well. I think that's kind of where it's coming from. From an Azure security perspective, that's one of the common questions being asked by a lot of folks for how do I get into the Azure security space? And I was kind of wait for towards the end, but maybe while we're on the topic anyways, might as well just touch that as well. What's your recommendation usually for folks who want to get into the Azure security space as a profession?
Yeah. So Microsoft, when I was working there, created Microsoft Learn, and Microsoft Learn is free. And it's a whole bunch of, the developer advocate team made a lot of modules in there. And then they have all these amazing technical writers. Like they have a huge technical writing staff that made many of the modules. And then some of like the engineers that build the security things contributed and added to the modules. And basically, so each Azure Learn kind of program or course or whatever, it's kind of like a tutorial where they walk you through things. Some of them have a sandbox where you can actually go and do stuff. And some of them you go through and you read and you watch videos, and then you answer some little quizzes. It depends on the one. So it's not a thorough, in-depth, like really, really long thing. It's a lot of shorter course, like none of them are like, 20 hours or something like that, which is good though, because then you can kind of take bite-sized learning, if that makes sense. So you could do maybe one Microsoft Learn program per week or something, and not chew up too much of your personal time. And then they also have some, which I believe you can take. It's like if you cover all of these things, then you can go for a certain certification. The Microsoft certifications, basically like you have to know the stuff or you won't pass, which is ideal with a certification. But from what I understand, like some organizations will ask for them and some of them don't. It kind of depends on where you work and how they decide to test you. So if you have no job experience, having certification can show I'm very serious about learning this. But I got asked this morning, and I don't have any certifications at all. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. But so learning at Microsoft Learn for free is super smart. Like learn for free. And then also We Hack Purple courses are free as well. And we have one about basically, so we have one and it's free, but you need an Azure trial, which is also free if you haven't already used your trial. I had a lot of people sign up and they're like, well, it said I already used my trial. And I'm like, I don't work for Microsoft anymore. I can't give you free Azure. If I could give you free Azure, I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but I would keep the Azure. It would be mine. Right? Like, I'm like, yeah. But so if you haven't already used your trial, basically we load a whole bunch of intentionally vulnerable stuff into your trial and then we secure it. So we go through it and we do a VA and we look at the right stuff and we're like, let's turn on HTTPS, like let's force that, let's do this, let's do that. And you just slowly lock down all of the stuff. And we talk about like how to turn on different features and when you might want them. And I don't say exact prices because I know those things will change, but I try to give you kind of estimates as to cost. And so it's a less biased view, I hope, because I don't work for Microsoft anymore, meaning I could say whatever I want as long as I'm not breaking a non-disclosure agreement. And since I haven't worked there in years, I don't actually know anything good anymore.
Well, you still know a lot as well. So Tanya, that was really helpful. And I hope that answers your question as well, Mukhtar. I think it's great advice on start learning free material, get into Azure trial and try and secure an application in there. But hopefully that answers your question, Mukhtar, but feel free to follow up. And I think I've got a few more people who probably have been in the Azure space for a while. And from what you mentioned as well, when you kind of start a trial and put something vulnerable, turn on different things, that was going to be my next question as well, as to for people who are listening in and going, all right, I've heard Tanya, I'm going to turn on for a trial now. I've turned on my Azure trial for the first time, not because I've used it before. What are some of the basics, I guess, cybersecurity hygiene thing that we should be doing as part of building that up? And should I start with tenant, subscription? Where am I going over here?
Well, okay, so let's say you're a person learning on your own. If you don't have anything inside your subscription, the only thing you can really do is turn on multi-factor authentication for your account. So that's the main thing. So you're like, you make a strong password and it's unique for this account. You don't have it in 25 other accounts, the same password. And then you turn on multi-factor authentication because you are the owner account. And if I were you, I would add your phone number so that Azure can call you if it thinks there's an emergency. And it sounds weird, but when I used to work at Microsoft, Azure called my boss to tell on me. So I was making an intentionally vulnerable demo because that was part of my job. And then it said, like, you've checked a secret into your code. And I was like, I know, shut up. It's not real. Like, it's not real secret. Like, but how can it tell? Right. And it's like, we don't like that. Don't do that. And I was like, just do it. Okay, Azure. And so then it phoned my boss and said, like, there's a security incident with one of your employees. A secret has been put in. And so I get this phone call like, oh my gosh, Tanya, Azure called me. So first of all, that's weird to have a robot call you. Second of all, apparently, like, you put secrets in the code and then put it in production. What are you doing? And I'm like, I'm making that vulnerable demo we talked about. And he's like, oh, it's like, well, Azure's pretty ticked off at you, Missy. Yeah. And then we laughed about it. And then the real incident response team called and I was in doo-doo. I had to do some
then. So turn on an for sure. What
so
put
your phone number in, your contact information in. So then after that, you would want to load stuff in there. And by that, I mean infrastructure or applications or services. So if you don't have anything in there, then there's nothing to secure besides your account. So let's say let's say you're going to do a platform as a service, and then you want to put a web app on there. So you would deploy a platform as a service, which is literally a couple clicks and a credit card swipe. And then within like maybe 5-10 minutes, they've built it for you, which, to be quite clear, is super exciting. And then deploying your app, if you have a Docker container, you can literally just be like, this is my Docker container, please make this a reality for me. And it just loads up your app. Or you can say, actually, I've got some code I want to show you, whatever the thing is. And so then if you have an app on there and you have a platform as a service, you can start to secure those things. So you could So what I like to do is immediately open whatever the service is. So in this case, the platform as a service, or PaaS. So they call it an app service. So so you go to your app service and you look at it. And I like to look at the configuration settings in the security area. So on the left, so like when you're in your app service, on the left, there's just this ton of menu things. Go to the one that says security and check out the things there. And so I personally believe that on the internet, things have changed for years, and I think we should only have HTTPS everywhere. I'm biased because I'm obsessed with security, but I don't think HTTP is the way anymore. Encryption is cheap and or free now, thanks to Let's Encrypt. And so one of the first things I do is I force HTTPS. Like, there will be no HTTP connections to this, only HTTPS. And then it'll say, you know, what version of TLS do you want? I'm like, obviously the super new one.
Yep.
But, you know, it'll give you some suggestions of things to do. And so go through the settings and see what you want. So you might want to put this app service behind a firewall. Like if you just have one app service, maybe you don't feel you need that, but generally people put firewalls around things. So then you could go and make an Azure firewall, and then make a network security group and be like, okay, so my app service goes in my network security group and the firewall goes around the network security group. Life is pretty sweet now. People are not attacking my stuff. And then I would go look in Security Center and see if it has recommendations for me, because it might say, oh, you have a network security group, but so I saw this when I first started at Microsoft. One of our advocates had a test box and it was like, but it's outside of the firewall and all the groups. And like that guy's just on his lonesome. And also it keeps getting attacked like every day. It was one of my greatest joys when I started at Microsoft was this one box that we found. And I immediately alerted the owner and he's like, oh, it's just like a dev box from a zillion years ago with old demos on it. Like it's garbage, Tanya. I'll just delete it. I was like, no, don't, Damien. There's someone who's manually trying to hack it every day and failing, and it's awesome. And so I started using it in my demos. I'm like, he's back. Our attacker, him or her, is back to do a bad job again of hacking. And it's like, I have this person's IP address. Like they're really bad at it. It was so fun to see them just fail over and over. So
interesting. So it would tell you when I guess I'm coming from a AWS background. It's always fascinating for me as well. So it would show you in real time. As in, this is not Sentinel. This is Security Center.
Yeah, Security Center would say basically like someone has tried to log in to your box like 10 times and failed, so they're locked out again. And then I'm like, what IP address? And it's like this IP address. I'm like, oh, it's our friend. Our friend is back and was like manually trying to brute force this box with nothing of value on it whatsoever. And so it took months and months for the person to finally give up. I was like, oh, our friend is gone. And but it made for such great demos. You know, you feel it's like he's just such a failure at hacking.
Oh my god! I mean, all the YouTube script kiddies are going to be laughing at the poor thing. So I imagine, like, you could have at least tried some kind of a script and all this while you were there. But you know, kudos for points for trying at least. Actually, talking about logging as well, because I had a couple of questions come in, and the whole concept of people who come from a Windows background, who have had Windows environment for a long time, there is this, I don't know if it's a misunderstanding, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you need Active Directory or Azure Active Directory set up to be able to use Azure. Is that right?
Sort of. So if you you need to have an identity service. Right. You have to have one. And theoretically, you could buy Okta and then install it into Azure if that was a thing you really wanted.
Yep.
But basically, if you have users on a network, the network needs to figure out who you are. And that's just, how do I word this? So in the olden days, we just used firewalls to protect the network. But now I've heard people say like the perimeter is dead. And I don't want to make extreme statements like that. But basically, once you're inside the perimeter, like I don't think we should stop using firewalls, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't think that's so. Well, we still use firewalls, but they call it something else now. But sure, if you don't want to call it firewalls. But so to your point then, would I require that for the trial though? Or is that only when I'm trying to make it into an enterprise? As in the identity, like the Okta identity that you referred to? Like when I'm starting
or the Azure AD. So I think it kind of gets installed by default. I think that it's just there by default, whether you want it or not. I remember though, once I wanted to make my own instance of Azure Active Directory. So my original trials, when I was at Microsoft, they didn't have a trial. I had a real account, and then I was inside their AD. And then I wanted to make my own Azure Active Directory so that obviously I could make crappy demos of me smashing things, because that is my good time. But I'm not sure, actually. That's an interesting question, because I haven't, like when I teach the class, I don't really go into identity. I go specifically into the features.
I guess where I'm coming from is the fact that for people find it confusing as well. And so when I'm signing up for an Azure trial, I just need a username, password, and that's about it. So username, password,
and
MFA, credit card, mobile number. Don't have to think about Azure AD. It happens in the background possibly, and you get that
Yeah,
later
it
on.
does.
Ah,
Yeah, it
okay.
does, because so basically, so when we think of identity and access management, or IAM, um,
Mm,
basically it thinks that, or the way that it works is like you can go and give permission or not give permission to everything in your trial, but unless you're letting anyone else in there, you
yeah.
don't usually think of it. So let's say, for example, let's say I wanted to build a trial and I wanted you to come and teach with me. So I would make you a user in there. I would have to get, like, either put you in a group,
Yeah.
and then if we're just two teachers, we'd probably make each other super admins. But
Mm.
if we're actually trying to do a good, realistic job and not do a I am root or I am God example,
Yeah.
because like I find, like, when you do a lab, you're like, okay, everyone log in as root. P.S. Never do this. Right. And so
Yeah.
ideally, if you are going to teach, you teach the way you should do it. But let's say I give you the software developer role, or the database administrator role, or the network administrator role, but you can also just create your own role. So I could be like super cool teacher dude role, and I could name it that. And then I could just give you like God-esque privileges within our environment because we're teaching a course together. But then we could
Yeah.
give students only the ability, let's say, we're going to teach them some DevOps and some DevSecOps. So it's like, okay, so you guys can each make your own CI/CD pipelines in Azure DevOps, and you're allowed to make platforms as a service, and you're allowed to roll out infrastructure as code and infrastructure as a service. But that's it. I don't really trust you to do more stuff. That's all you're allowed. And so then you make a role that's like DevOps student role, and you
Yeah.
just give them that, and then that's all they can do. Someone was asking me the other day, like I was teaching a course, and they're like, I'm really concerned about the software developers disabling all my security tests and the CI/CDs. Like, how can I stop them from doing that? And I was like, talk to them, show them the value. He's like, no, but how can I force them to not do that? I'm like, take away their ability to edit the pipelines. I mean, like, to be clear, that's like a big middle finger you're giving all the DevOps teams. Like, I don't know, if I was on a DevOps team and I didn't have control over my own pipeline, I'd be pretty
Yeah,
not
without giving them a heads up and
enthusiastic.
getting their agreements, I guess. Yeah, that definitely is made like, well, I don't know, I don't want to call it quote Trump, but it sounds like a Trump way of doing it.
Yeah, but
Through the
it's the
wall.
no, but like if you're on the DevOps team, you're the one that makes the pipeline. The pipeline's yours. And to have the
Yeah.
security team take your own access away to your own thing, it's like, well, if I want to write a new test of any kind against my own app, I have to ask permission to the security team. It's like, this is the test environment. This is my play area. Go away. And so I
Yeah.
kept trying to give other answers that were where the DevOps team won't hate him. So
Yeah,
I was just
hopefully they
like,
don't. But that's a good segue into the next thing as well, because I think I love where we're going as well. We started off with setting it up as a trial and building that up with MFA, mobile number, credit card, and
yeah.
everything. Now, you've mentioned the DevOps side as well. Azure has its own Azure DevOps. So let's talk about the level 200 as well. If
Mhm.
the person listening to this is a Azure DevOps person and they want to secure the CI/CD pipeline, have automation, and
Mhm.
as they kind of go through this, what are some of the, I guess, basic security principles that you would recommend him or her to have as they're building the CI/CD pipeline for deploying application? Maybe let's start with that.
Yeah.
Let's start with
Okay.
what are some of the foundational security things you would do then? Because we spoke about Sentinel already, we spoke about Azure Defender already, Azure Security Center, but I'm sure we have Azure Policy somewhere in there as well. But let's start with
I want to
where
talk
do I
about
start
those.
with building application?
Okay. Okay. So a thing that I start off every consultant call with is that Azure DevOps is being sunset in the next few years because availability is the most important thing for most security folks. And I put it on Twitter, and a zillion Microsoft people came out and told me to shut my damn mouth very politely, but it was very like, no. And they all denied it. And then I had one of my clients confirm with their person the next day, and they're like, oh yeah, definitely it's being sunset. So like, yeah, people are going to get pissy with me. But anyway, no, but it's true. Availability is really important. And also, I'd just like to make clear, I think that's the dumbest business decision ever, because Azure DevOps is beautiful. I like it so much. And I know that everyone wants everyone to move to GitHub Actions, and GitHub Actions is super duper fun. but Azure DevOps works perfectly and it's so mature and it's good and I really like it and I don't want it to go away. Okay, so now that I've got that off my chest, so I think Azure DevOps is awesome. And basically, with a few clicks, you can actually lay out a simple pipeline. And so if you're a big organization, I would suggest making a template of a pipeline and making every single new pipeline have that template. So for instance, I want to have at least one dev box. I want to have at least one QA box, one UAT box, and then out onto prod. Okay, so let's say you always want to have those 3 levels, because let's say you have a user acceptance team, you have a QA team, obviously you have a dev team, or I don't know why you're doing DevOps. And so then let's say, so things that I like to check are, I want to run a dynamic scan, which is called DAST, so dynamic application security testing. I want to run unit tests. So usually devs, like they code. They run their little unit tests sometimes themselves from within the IDE. Sometimes they do it like with a terminal or a command prompt or whatever you want to call it. And sometimes they do it in the CI/CD. But basically unit tests are little tiny regression testing. And I believe that we should have security unit tests. But that is like one of my, because that's like really, really far left for security. Do you know what I mean? Like the first possible security test you could do, but I digress. Okay, so then I want to do software composition analysis. So check all of my third-party dependencies. So like a NuGet package, a Ruby gem, a really cool library that does blah. I want to make sure all those are not scary. Then I have static application security testing. So just like look at the code my team wrote, tell me if there's something obviously garbagey in there. And dynamic application security testing. So like punch my app in the face a bit. So to do the DAS, the dynamic testing, you have to put it onto the dev server. However, for the other two, you don't even have to put it, you don't even have to have a server or anything. You can just run it directly on the code. And Azure DevOps has like a bunch of really super beautiful plugins. So for instance, if you are doing an open source project and you're only going to run it 5 times a day or less, you can use Weight Source. It's called Weight Source Bolt, and it's free to run up to 5 times. So let's say, I don't know, you happen to have your own open source project, which I used to have. I would run it and it would tell me, oh, like this library you're using, we're a little concerned. And like, also, are you sure you're not violating this license? And I'm like, yikes. And then I would run dynamic scans. And like, it would tell me like, hey, it looks like maybe this, your input validation isn't so good here because we were able to do this bad thing to your app and it went along with our plan. So you should make it not do that anymore. And then I also check for secrets in the code, like we said before, where I got busted doing that at Microsoft. Yep. But I was doing it on purpose, just to be clear. I did not actually check a real Microsoft secret in, but I still look dumb. But yeah, so like, I guess I try to kind of check those 3, I call it like the 3 pillars. There we go. So like how my app is running and how it acts. So dynamic testing, the code I wrote, so that's SAST. And then SCA, the code I did not write, but I'm accepting the risk because I put it inside my app. Right. And so I feel like if you check those things, you're pretty good. If you want to be more advanced, you could do more stuff. So you could do like serious attack simulation sorts of things, or you could do performance testing, stress testing. Like you could have a penetration tester come in or like run a red team exercise. So like you can really, really stress your systems and see how far they can go. But if you could just test the 3 pillars, then you're going to have a pretty decent app. Test them and then fix the things you find, just to be clear. I don't mean just run tests. And I say that because seriously, when I was a pen tester, like you give the report and you're like, so you're going to fix it now. They're like, no, we're not. We had to change this box. And I'm like, my job's hopeless. I liked AppSec. I switched out of pen testing really fast because there's not enough social time and I've just got lonely. Anyway, AppSec is where you spend time and you help them fix the thing. And I just leave the pen testing consulting contracts and feel like my work's not done. It really irritated me. But anyway, I digress.
Fair enough. So to your point, then we've what the basic hygiene cover for all the automation pieces. What about the virtual machines that would be built as part of, say, run the CI/CD pipeline. It's built a infrastructure, virtual machine, and at that level, what are some of the basic hygiene at that level from a virtual machine perspective that is running the application?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so if you're hosting your app on a virtual machine, there's way more to do than if it's a platform as a service or a container. And the reason for this is the shared responsibility model. So if you do infrastructure as a service, so that means you're like, hey, Microsoft, I'd like to have, I don't know, a machine running Windows with this many cores, et cetera. And they're like, here you go. You have to patch it from then on. So you need to participate in Patch Tuesday, and you can call it Patch Wednesday or Patch Thursday if that's when you actually apply your patches, but you need to patch regularly. You also need to, in my opinion, run a VA scan regularly. And so Microsoft has their own VA scanner, but there's a zillion out there that are quite good that you could use. I used to use Nessus a lot when I was a pen tester because it's just so easy. It's just so easy. You're like, what do you want me to scan? I'm like, this range. And they're like, want me to do a big scan? I'm like, scan everything, Nessus. Just tell me what's wrong. I'll fix it.
Also, but not use the one from Microsoft, or is that because it's not doesn't have enough capability, or?
Oh, that was because it was before I worked at Microsoft.
Right.
And because I was going from data center to data center to data center, and it wasn't cloud. It was I was doing multiple data centers. So I wore a hat and mitts and a coat.
Fair enough. You were wearing a hat as well. Wait, so does Azure
really
have
cold.
a VA? Sorry, I was going to ask you.
Yeah, so part of Azure Defender is it does VA for you. So it will basically every 24 hours, Azure Defender will VA every single thing in your subscription. It can take, and if you update something, it'll go and VA it usually within an hour, but it'll tell you like this will refresh. So when you go and fix something, so like let's say Security Center says, hey, I have a recommendation that you go and do X. So you go and do X. And what used to happen is then it would not show that it was remediated. And I'd be giving demos and I'm like, is this thing on? But it turns out what it was waiting for was for the VA scanner to come back and check that it actually happened. Because sometimes you send the command and it doesn't actually. And this is why when I was a pen tester and I would use Nessus all the time, I would make so much money because, and I don't mean Nessus specifically, I mean any VA scanner that is good. There are a whole bunch that are good. But that is the brand that company used. And so I would basically like run the scan and just see patches that just didn't take for whatever reason. Or maybe someone was running around doing the hardening guide on all the machines and then they missed one. And that might sound odd, but it happens. And like the patch just doesn't take, or they send out the range and like this machine was disconnected, or like they got the range wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And so they like with SCCM, like System Center from Microsoft, they send out all these patches and then it just doesn't hit everywhere. And also sometimes weird things happen. Like I was working somewhere and I was like, you have Microsoft Office 2003 on your load balancer. And they're like, oh, should we upgrade that? I'm like, do you write short stories on your load balancer? I feel like maybe you could just take it off. Like, why do you have anything other than load balancer stuff on your load balancer? Like the only other thing I might find there usually would be like a WAF, like a web app firewall, right? So I'm like, then I would see that. I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. But I'm like, Microsoft Office, no. And don't get me wrong, I like Office. I'm not trying to say I don't, but it just doesn't fall under load balancer. I'm just like, oh, what's going on here, guys? So it helps you spot weirdo things, like things that don't like one of these things are not like the other. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. So going back to your VM thing then, so when you're thinking about securing a VM, then so is this almost like, what about access to the VM itself? Because there is that conversation as well. I mean, is there a bastion? Is that the concept exists in there?
So there's two ways that you can do that in Azure. So one, you can use a bastion host, or I used to call it a jump box. So basically you like remote desktop into a specific box, and then you open up a remote desktop from that box to the VM that you actually want to work on. You could also use SSH keys to connect directly. Sometimes it depends on what you want to do. But what I used to do the most often was I would use just-in-time access control. So it closed all of the ports. So this is part of Azure Defender. So it closed all of the ports on the whole thing. And then I would log into the portal of Azure, and then I'd flick open, let's say I want to RDP in So I'd flick open the RDP port. I think it's like 25 or 27 or whatever. But anyway, it just says RDP. And I'm like, yes, please. So it would open it and it'd be like, how long do you want it open for? And you could choose like 1 hour, 3 hours, 8 hours. But after 8 hours, they're like, no, you have to tell us again, because we don't think you're doing this for more than 8 hours. Like, we're going to close it on you. And so then I flip it open. Then I am able to RDP to it. And then I have to do username, password, and then MFA. And then I'm on there. And then after a certain amount of time, so I remember I'd be like, oh, 1 hour, I'm so fast. And then it would kick me out. I'm like, what happened? Oh, it's been an hour. So I learned that I needed to click the 3 hour one. I also was like, I don't need this. This is fine. Like, I'm not going to forget to take away people's access. And then my friend Abel and I were like working together, and I'd given him access. And then 2 weeks later, we're going to go work again. He's like, oh, do you have to turn my access on? I'm like, no, I totally forgot to take it away. And so I was like, having it automatically close things for me is actually really helpful, because it turns out I forgot. Yeah. Oh, Vinny
mentions they're using Qualys for VA now.
Yeah, so I like Qualys. I honestly, I haven't really seen any VA software that I thought sucked. I used an open source one and I found it really clunky to get it going. I didn't like that one, but of all the paid ones, like I haven't seen one where I'm like, this is garbage. Like, they all just look at the patches and they're like, this one's missing, or like, oh, here's your settings. That's disconcerting. But with the VA, there's way more that you can do to secure it. So like, definitely patching, but follow the hardening guide, right? Like there's another thing you can do is that when you're going to do the infrastructure as a service, you can go. So I don't know if you've heard of the CIS benchmarks.
Yes.
So the Center for Internet Security. So basically, this big group of really smart, awesome humans got together and came up with what they feel are acceptable settings and hardening settings for everything. And so Microsoft partnered with them and made infrastructure as a service where you can say, just give me this one that's already got all the Azure, all of the CIS benchmark settings set up. And so that's a huge win. You're like, don't give me the default one, give me that. And I think it costs slightly more, but only because it has like more features built into it. So those settings cost more or something. But I remember thinking like, wait, I can get pre-hardened infrastructure. Yes, please. Yes, please. I would like that.
That would definitely like that. So maybe a good way to talk. So VA, for people who may not know, we've been talking about VAs, vulnerability assessment softwares. I think because someone might, for some reason, think it's virtual assistant, but it's virtual vulnerability assessment in case there is any confusion. So maybe a good segue, and I think there's a question from Mukhtar as well on threat intelligence and threat protection. But I'm assuming that kind of goes into the whole SIEM category. But any thoughts on the whole threat intelligence and threat protection in Azure?
Okay, so Microsoft offers an additional service on top of Azure Defender called threat protection. And so you can get it from your database, for your databases and for your storage containers, I believe. And basically it's extra monitoring that is specific for that. And I ended up getting it for my databases because even though it's like demo data, I'm like, I don't want anyone breaking it. And also what it would do is, so like, then I would attack my own web apps because I'm a jerk like that. And I'd be giving demos of me like trying to smash things. And then the threat protection service would say, like, it would alert me and sometimes it would block it. And I was like, ooh.
Right.
And so then I could go do an investigation. So Azure Defender at Security Center will tell you if they see an obvious attack. So even if you don't have the threat protection, there's certain ones that are extremely obvious that out of the box, they will just detect for you. So if I am doing like an SQL injection attack and it's a really obvious one, like or 1 = 1, which is the most common one, it'll just notice and tell you this app is being attacked and we're concerned and we're pretty sure it's SQL injection. And what you need to do to protect against this is this and this and this. And so that's just out of the box. You don't need the extra threat protection. So basically threat protection. Oh, you can also add it for your data as well. But it's basically like protecting your database essentially. But it's an extra cost, and I believe it's $15 per month per server. Not per database. Yeah. Well, as of like 2 months ago, the last time I taught on Azure.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, we kind of have to be
Yeah.
careful with the pricing just because it changes so quickly, and you're like,
Yeah.
someone watches this and someone tweets you at you and me, and like,
Yeah.
hey, you guys said $15. Look at this now. I'm like, well, all right.
Mhm.
Hopefully that answers your
Yes.
question, Victor. But maybe, sorry, go on.
For threat intelligence, that's a separate topic. And
Oh,
I
right. Yeah.
don't know if Microsoft offers a threat intelligence service. I know they certainly have a lot of threat intelligence because they have like entire teams that are looking into that because they have a really, really high risk profile because they're a very attractive target, being a company that measures their profits in trillions and also being the makers of, the world's most used consumer operating system, like the second most used cloud. Like they're a very big, very extremely attractive target. So I know that they do threat intelligence, but I don't know if they sell that as a service.
Cool.
I'm unaware of that if they do that. But if they did, it would be so cool. Anyway.
Anyone is listening, if they know the answer, feel free to drop that as well. But thank you for that Victor question. And so we've kind of spoken about basic foundational security for when we're doing securing VMs, when we're securing tenant subscriptions as well. In terms of scaling, how does this scale in terms of, in my mind, I'm going, do I get multiple subscriptions or multiple tenants? What's the recommended way here to kind of scale out when you're trying to be a global application from anywhere, I guess?
Okay, so this is a super hard question because every organization seems to do it differently. Like when I worked at Microsoft, our team had like, we would call it like the parent subscription, and then we were the children's subscription underneath, because we're supposed to only try to spend $200 worth of Azure per month. But they would like, we work for them, we're making stuff for them, so it's not like we would personally get a bill. But they're like, could you try to budget for that because we don't want the advocacy team to spend a zillion Azure dollars per week, which is very reasonable. Having budget's important. So then they could monitor, and if like one of us was a bit out of hand, then they could be like, hey, so what if you didn't run 10,000 different machine learning models per day? Right. So that not like in an angry way, but in a, we don't want to blow all the budget way. And so that worked really well for them. But I've also seen it where basically companies do not trust their employees to purchase anything. And that worked. Like, I don't know. I've worked at places where I'm like, would I want the employee to be able to just press a button and be able to buy stuff? Maybe I'm not that comfortable with it. Like at We Hack Purple Eyes, there, the maximum we got to was 7 people, but I never gave financial signing authority to anyone else. Like they would send things to me and I'd be like, approved, like 98% of the time. But sometimes I'm like, what? No, no, we don't. We have like 12 cameras. We do not need another camera or whatever the thing was. And so then I was like glad that my employees did not have the keys to the kingdom. And so when I worked in IT and the government, I remember like I would have to go and ask to have a VM made, but I was a dev and they were ops and there'd have to be this approval process, etc. And so then when those groups moved to the cloud, it's like, you're not going to give ownership privileges to every single person. And so some organizations, there'll be one parent kind of subscription, or they'll have different departments that have their own subscription so they can manage their budget, etc. But like you have one tenant and there's one papa subscription or parent or grandma subscription. There's the top of the entire family, and then it would go down. And it really depends how granular you get depending upon the organization. And I don't want to say like level of trust of their employees, but maybe like level of responsibility they plan on making them have.
Right. So subscription allows for such a structure where you can have like what you said, a parent subscription, and underneath that we can have one business unit have their own subscription, which could be a dev account, and then another subscription, which is a product account. Like I imagine, what would be the boundary that you would set up for, hey, this is a business unit, this is their dev, this is their test, this is their prod kind of thing. How would you set that up?
So I feel like how you pay
in subscriptions,
like, for the subscriptions.
So would I give them individual subscriptions? Is that a good practice, or would I go?
It's up to you. Every single company is a snowflake. That is what I have learned. The more companies I talk to about the Azure, the more I'm like, you all do it differently. And so I've decided there isn't a best practice way. There's a what way is best for your org way. And so if you're doing it one way and it's not working, you should try another way, not try that way harder. I see a lot of organizations where they're like, well, we've been doing it like this for this long and we're really not getting traction. And I'm like, well, don't try to enforce it more because it's already not working. So let's try to walk this back and find a different way that might work better.
Yeah. Very good idea.
But for dev boxes versus QA boxes versus prod and stuff, I would organize that more from a network level rather than a business unit level, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry, I guess what I was thinking was more from perspective that what's the boundary for information? I guess, you know how we were talking about perimeter earlier, and the perimeter is, I guess, dead, but still exists, I guess, for some extent.
We still want it.
But, yeah. So
I want one.
Yeah. So what's the highest level of abstraction one can get between? So would that be if I have two tenants? So tenant is the highest level of abstraction, as I know. Like there's like unless you have a tenant access, you don't have anything. But within the tenant, if I have subscription, the next layer of abstraction, that's subscription. Is that right? As in tenant, subscription, and then I can have multiple subscription. But one subscription cannot talk to the other subscription.
If it's underneath, it reports up.
Under the same tenant.
Under the same tenant. Yeah. So like, let's say tenant and then two subscriptions that go out like this.
Yep.
Like if you're on the same network, you can talk to each other, but you can't force them to do like to buy stuff in the other subscription.
Right.
But I was in like a several layer below child subscription. It makes me sound like I'm like a great grandchild. But like when I was at Microsoft, I was not like the big boss or whatever. And so I could only force changes within my subscription. And so I was telling my boss, I'm like, you should put me in the higher up subscription, like move my user to the higher up subscription, because then I could go and secure all of the systems of all my developer advocate colleagues. And he's like, you are not going to go and mess with their demos. I'm like, I'm not going to mess with their demos. I'm just going to make their demos safe. He's just like, I know what you're on to, Tanya.
Wait, is this where the Azure policies comes in as well?
Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly. So before we came on, I asked Ashish if we could talk about policies. Okay. So I used to think policies sucked. I really didn't like them. When I was a dev, they'd be like, oh, we're going to help you. We're going to give you a tool. It's a policy. And I'm like, what do you mean? And it would be like a web page on our intranet of like words on a screen. I'm like, this is not a tool. This is boringness that will put me to sleep. What is this? And they're like, no, but like the policy, it's like a law within an organization. Like thou shalt do this. And I was like, yeah, but none of the devs are doing it, so it doesn't help me. And they're like, well, you could kind of hit them with it, like it's a stick. And I was like, okay, I don't like this. I thought that I did not enjoy that. So then when I went to Azure and they're like, oh, we have policies. I was like, yeah, you have policies, paper, duh. And they're like, no, it's a tool. And I was skeptical, let's be clear. And so I got to hang out in Israel with the team that made all the recommendations for Azure Security Center. And they're like, no, let me show you. They're like, so let's say your policy is that all your app services or anything that delivers a web app must be HTTPS only. I'm like, yeah, I want that. And they're like, okay, so we're going to set that as part of the default policy. I'm like, okay, and then what? And they're like, well, in the next 24 hours, it's going to VA everything in your, like all of the dev advocate subscriptions and tell you everyone that's out of line. And so then I could go click down and see who owned it. I'd be like, Ashley, we need to talk. You have like 4 web apps and they're not forging HTTPS. Can we talk? I'll explain to you why you want it. And they'd be like, so I just need to press this button. I'm like, so then I started like meeting with different dev advocates trying to like secure their demos. And so the policy is just like you set the rules within Azure and then it tells you every single person that's not complying. And if you have the power, which my boss would not give me, because I am a control freak. I'm not saying he was like wrong or anything. It's just like, I want to secure all the things. I'm like, you're blocking me from that. And so basically like you can actually, if you have the power, which I did not, so I did eventually over like my little team, but I never did over like all of the dev advocates. And I get that they don't want me to break stuff. Anyway, what you can do is you can actually say, like, just press the button and say auto remediate for me. And a bunch of it'll just actually change all the settings for you or apply the patch for you or do whatever the thing is. And not all of them are push a button, but the goal was when I left to make 100% of them just a button you press and it magically remediates it for you. Yeah. And so then you can make your own custom policy of like any rules that you want. Or you could say, so we are like, let's say a healthcare provider and we have to follow HIPAA. So you can actually choose and say like, apply HIPAA to my subscription. And then it will auto check all the ones that are possible to check in an automatic way. Like some of them you have to like look with your eyes. And so it'll say this one, you have to manually verify. This is how you would manually verify it. Because some things you need a human being for, but every single part that it can, it would automate it. And so they made one for the Canadian government called PBMM, which means nothing unless you work in the Canadian government. It's very it's government speak. But the point is that then like they could just apply it and it would tell them every single person that's not compliant. It was just such a beautiful thing to be able to automate. So to me, that's a real tool. Like to me, a real technical safeguard versus a bunch of stuff on a screen that no one reads.
So Azure Palette policies, definitely check them out as well then. Maybe that's also a good segue into my final question for the episode, which was around the maturity scales as well. Like I feel like we kind of spoke about different maturity over here. We spoke about, hey, starting with trial, MFA, credit card, email, phone number, everything. And I'm going, okay, I guess I'm level 1. So what's like different levels as you kind of go up? What's a mature Azure build that you would know of that people can strive towards?
So that's a really hard conversation. But basically, if you go through the recommendations in Security Center and you do them, you're going to be in an awesome place because basically they put all their super brains together and came up with this list and how to prioritize it. Another thing that you could do is like apply the policies, like I said. So pick the policies of your country. So for instance, for New Zealand and Australia, I believe they have the government policy. So if you worked in the government of Australia or government of New Zealand, whatever, basically like you would apply that and you're like, haha, I just did all of the things that I can go home now. No, but it's really nice, right? And basically it will set this list of what it thinks best practices are for you. And so you can mature by continuing to do that. So they have this thing called Secure Score. And I know that like I keep seeing conference talks about how gamification makes everything works. Everyone loves video games. I'm like, not everyone loves video games. Like some of us think they're super boring, FYI. And so I know I sound like such a grouch. Sometimes I play Dr. Mario. I'm sort of okay at it. But I'm just like, I'm not a gamer and that's okay. But basically it shows you a score. So it's like, let's say there's 1,200 suggestions that we would have for you, and you've done 850 of them. So we're going to give you a score of like 62%. And then you can strive towards increasing that score. And it might sound really silly, but Ashish, I find that my bosses, when I would do security, they would only notice me when there was a really crappy security incident, or I was pushing for a security thing I wanted, and they're like, no, it's going to tick people off, Tanya. We don't want to tick people off. And I'm like, but we need to do this because, and the rest of the time, it's like I wasn't alive. And I'd be like working really hard to try to do things, but no one notices that you worked with a team and they, remediated 10 vulnerabilities instead of 2, like they originally wanted to. They're just like, there wasn't an incident today, whatever. But with Secure Score, I could show my boss like, hey, look, I used to have a score of 42 and now I'm at 82. Like, I'm awesome. Can I get a hell yeah? And then like they could like see how hard you've worked. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it
and
does.
So, because I don't want them to only notice me when something blows up in our faces.
I think scoring is a good idea. So is this part of the like?
That's part of the free Security Center.
Oh, perfect. Also, it's not like you don't have to pay extra for it or something.
Yeah.
You just
Same with the policies too. It's all part of the free thing. That's why I think, okay, so like, again, this is in my imagination, but I think that all the cloud security posture management tools came from Security Center. Like when I saw that Azure had Security Center and AWS at the time didn't even have guard duty yet, I believe, I was just like, this is so cool. Can I have this for my own data center back when I used to work in the government? Like, this is the best. And so it makes sense that industry was like, well, security center is cool, but have you seen this? And so, yeah, I think that they probably in my own head, they invented that entire
Fair
type of
enough.
tool.
Cool. We've
Yeah.
got a comment from Vineet as well over here. Just says, I think you can integrate threat intelligence with Sentinel as well. There you go. So Sentinel can go
awesome.
even extra level up in there as well. So that's pretty much what I had from a technical question perspective. Only got 3 more fun questions for people, the
Okay.
3 people who do not know you in the crowd, to get to know the other side of you as well. First one being, what do you spend most time on when you're not working on Azure or technology?
I spend a lot of time on my so I want to say garden, but I guess it's almost like a farm now. So I used to just have a really extravagant, ridiculously large garden, but I moved and bought 3 acres. And so now I have a 1/4 acre or 1/2 acre farm that me and my partner are working on setting up. And so I already have flowers blooming. It's so exciting.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And so we've rented a big excavator. We're Doug, so I got to drive this giant machine, and I felt really powerful. I don't know how else to tell you.
Yeah.
But I just
Oh, yeah.
I lifted up logs and moved them that weigh hundreds of pounds, and I'm like, yes, I'm so strong. It was
Oh,
really
wow.
fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, congratulations on the big farm, and looking
Thank
forward to
you.
pictures on your Twitter feed for all
Oh,
the
yeah.
big farm. So you're technically a farmer then as well then? Is that
Yeah.
the point when people become a farmer, when you get an acre of land, I guess?
Well, last year I sold food at the end of my driveway. I made my partner, as a gift for me, made me a farm stand out of reused pellets. So we went
Oh,
around
nice.
and found it. Everyone throws out pallets around here. We're like, let's steal all of them because what's really expensive right now. And then we repurposed all of it into this thing at the end of my driveway, and we made $550 selling vegetables and flowers at the end of my driveway. And so we're like, that's it. We're technically we're farmers now because we made money. We are
Yeah.
professionals.
That's pretty much
So-
it. I don't think what else you need to qualify. Like you have almost like a vegetable farm, and you have selling vegetable as well. That's 2 tick boxes right there. Oh,
Yeah.
so maybe that. Well, I don't know if this is the answer to the second question as well. Then, what is something that you're proud of, but is not on your social media?
Yeah, I'm proud of the food. I guess that is true. Something that isn't on my social media that I'm proud of. Well, I became a stepmama since the pandemic started, and I get lots of hugs, and I feel like that's something to be proud of. I'm definitely learning to be
definitely
a
feel
parent,
so.
and it is definitely a huge learning curve. I'm like, oh my gosh, but last week you did like it when I made that food, and now you think it's awful and that I've offended you. I don't understand, little people. So it's definitely I feel like I'm definitely this undercover hacker trying to figure out how the little humans work.
What's the secret for parenthood? No one knows. We'll find out one day
know.
all together.
I know. I thought they liked butter chicken, so I made butter chicken from scratch. They really liked it, and then I made it again, and they're just like, "This is awful. Why are you so cruel?" I'm like, "But I thought that you liked that." 3 weeks ago, I was a hero, and now I suck. I don't know.
Oh, life is hard. Actually, maybe talking about food as well. That's my third question. What is your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share?
Okay, so I love Thai food. So I love so I've never found an Asian country's food that I didn't like. And I really, really, really like Thai food. And so I was in Toronto this week for an IANS faculty thing. And anyway, I put out this thing that said, I'm in Toronto and this is my location. Can someone suggest any type of Asian food, including Southeast Asian food, any type, that you think is tasty? And so 3 of my followers all said Pad Thai on Queen Street, or Duncan Street. I guess it's just off Queen Street. So PAI Thai. And I had the larb salad. So it's ground pork with really hot peppers and kind of lime in it and lots of lettuce. And they served it with sticky rice. And I was just like, I'm going to die a happy woman. This is so good. It was so good. And I brought all the other speakers with me who didn't have to fly out right away. And then there's I guess I consult for IANS on the side 1 or 2 hours a week. And so then all these people that I helped solve all their technical problems were there. So then I finally got to meet them in person, and people gave me hugs. And it's been so long since I have had hugs other than from my little ones and my partner because of COVID. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best ever. And so, yeah, it's just great. And getting to meet people in person for the first time that I've been working with for years. It's such a pleasure. And oh my gosh, that Thai food was out of this world. We had to wait in line outside in the rain. Totally worth it. They did give us
Yeah,
margaritas while we were waiting. So it
Thai
wasn't all
food it is
bad.
then. So talking about other places where people can find you as well, I believe you're at RSA as well coming up as well. So where can people find you on
Yes.
social media, and where can people find you speaking, talking for the next month or so?
Okay, so on social media, I am at SheHacksPurple. So I have a YouTube channel. I have like Twitter that I use a lot, LinkedIn a lot. I have a Facebook account, but honestly, my intern answers that. I'm not really a fan. Actually, she just graduated, so I shouldn't call her an intern anymore. She graduated this month. Go, Amanda. Anyway, and at RSA, so I have a newsletter. So if you go to newsletter.shehackspurple.ca, I'm going to send out a schedule shortly. So I am doing 12 events at RSA. So I'm speaking at the conference 3 times. So I'm giving a talk, a panel, and a birds of a feather. But I'm also speaking at the Purple Cloud Summit with Ashish. Well, not together with Ashish. So like I speak and then he speaks. But I'm also doing 6 or 7 book signings. So I'm doing one with VMware, with Juniper Networks, with Apiro, with Cloud Defense, with the RSA bookstore. And there's one more, and now I feel like a jerk. I don't remember. Yeah, and then so right before RSA is B-Side San Francisco, and all day Sunday I'm going to be at the Bright booth. And so if you are going to be at B-Side San Francisco, please come to the Bright booth and hang out with me, because being at a booth for a really long time is boring without awesome humans. And so if all of you could come visit me at the booth, that would be amazing. I'm going to have tons of stickers. Bright stickers, She Acts Purple, We Act Purple, etc. And there's going to be, I believe, quite a few surprises occurring. So please come hang out at the Bright booth and give me hugs. I know I'm probably not supposed to say that, but I really do like hugs. And Ashish is going to be around as well. And so you should all come see him speak at the Purple Cloud Summit. But please tell me all the other places you're going to be so I can stalk you back. Where are you going to be, Ashish?
I think it's funny. I think you and I both have something coming out which you talk about. Where are we for the next month as well? So people should definitely follow the social media pages as well. But that was what I had time for, and this was really amazing. Thank you so much for spending the time with us and sharing level 200 for Azure Security Fundamentals. And hopefully everyone else gets to go back and see all the live stream sessions. And thank you for everyone who was on the Twitter space as well. Ronald, and I can't get the name of Commute. Oh, it's an institution. Oh, hey, thanks for hanging out on the Twitter spaces as well. I'm going to end the Twitter space, but thank you for everyone who was on the live stream. That was also the end of our Azure Security Month. Next month, we're doing RSA and talking for our RSA month. So yeah, we'll talk to you guys then. But for now, thank you and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Actually, long weekend for people in the US. So see ya. Peace.